Sylvia Acevedo, welcome to the Leadership Classroom.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are thrilled to have you. What a treat for us. Your career is well documented, and the success that you've had is simply incredible. Sylvia, there's so much that we're going to dive into, but let's start with this. Given this is the Leadership Classroom, how would you best define leadership?
Leadership is several things. One is really having a clear goal, communicating that so everyone understands what their role is in that, and then really driving the organization and the team to understand, what success looks like, and really celebrating that as well. One of the great things about leadership, which is different than management. So management is when you have known goals and known resources, and leadership is sometimes you still have to achieve your goals when things really change quite a bit and you suddenly don't have known resources, but you still have your eye on the prize and you still achieve goals. And to me, that is really the big difference between leadership and, say, management.
And Sylvia, you were born in South Dakota, a military family, raised in near poverty. You moved to New Mexico, and at the age of 7, you joined the Girl Scouts. You were encouraged to pursue your like of engineering, your interests in engineering. Tell me about some of the leaders that you worked with, came across as you were a child in Girl Scouts, and how they shaped you as you grew up.
You know, um, I didn't realize what an impact Girl Scouts had in my life until the mid-aughts when somebody from Stanford, a researcher, was calling me and said, "You're one of the first Hispanics, male or female, to get a graduate engineering degree from Stanford." And at that time, Stanford wasn't even really recruiting. So how did you know about Stanford? How did you have the skills and the ability, the persistence, the resilience, the ability to actually graduate and then have this amazing career? And the more I kind of thought about it and looked back, I realized a very large pivot point was when I joined the Girl Scouts. And when I think back to a couple of the key moments where my troop leaders, when they saw me looking at the stars at a camp, when we were out camping, and one of them just sat next to me and showed me that those twinkly lights were actually stars and planets, and they had an organization of constellations. And later on, that particular troop leader remembered that, and when we were deciding to earn different badges, she really encouraged me to earn a science badge, and she said to do something around space. And I decided to get an Estes rocket kit, and I had to get several because I kept failing, but I kept, really trying to solve it. One of the great things about Girl Scouts is failure is first attempt in learning. I failed a lot of times, but finally that rocket went up into the sky. And I felt like, you know what? I can do science, I can do math. But they also taught me 2 really important skills, which was how do you create opportunity? Because when you are raised in poverty or near poverty, you don't know how to create opportunity, because if you did, you wouldn't be there. So understanding how to set goals, break them into smaller steps, and when you run into trouble or get stuck, ask for help. That sounds really simple, but it's amazing how many kids don't know that. So learning that was really an eye-opening moment for me, and it was like, "Oh, that's how you people get their dreams. That's how you make, your life wishes come true." And then the other one was never leave the side of a sale of Girl Scout cookies until you hear no 3 times. And that taught me persistence, resilience, how do you find common ground? And those skills were absolutely invaluable for me in my engineering career.
I wonder, to follow up on that, Sylvia, how that translated, the hearing no 3 times, how that translated into your career, and if there were times that you found yourself using that along the way.
So what was really great is, at that age of 7, I started building those 2 muscles. One, that muscle of how to create opportunity and how do you make your dreams come true. But the other one was when somebody tells you no, how do you turn that into a yes? So when my band leader in ninth grade and 10th grade, I was the number one percussionist, and we got a big set of timbales. And my band director, even though I was first chair and I could normally choose my marching band instrument, he said, "No." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "They're too heavy." And I said, "Okay, I can solve that." And all summer long, I worked out, and I got strong enough that I could carry those timbales, which are basically a third of my weight. And then when I wanted to go to college and I signed up for college counseling, the college counselor, she saw me sitting in the lobby and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, I'm here to sign up to go to college." And she said, "Girls like you don't." And back then, statistically, she was right, but as an educator, she was really wrong to say that. And, so what did I do? That was my first no. I stood up and I walked into her office, and then she followed me in, and then she said, "What do you wanna do and study in college?" And I said, "I wanna be an engineer," and she laughed, and that was just my second no, and I went on and became an engineer and a rocket scientist, so that's how that worked. And then in professional, I mean, it was really hard breaking into Silicon Valley, very, very hard. There wasn't anyone that looked like me. When I show up, they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." They didn't say it, but it was like, not the Stanford engineer I kinda have envisioned. So breaking in took a long time. It was really hard. I had to do everything possible to break in. But then once I broke in and people would tell me, "You can't do something," I would really, "How do I find common ground? What do I need to do to get to the next step?" When I saw one of I did a manufacturing design of the layout of an entirely new build for IBM, and it was really successful. And there was a tour of the new building facility, and as the top executives were looking at it, I noticed that they were highlighting some of my innovations. And at that point, I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, I've always wanted to be an engineer and technical, but now I want to be one of those guys. Now I get to be one of them." And my boss laughed. He just laughed, a big guffaw. But I remember thinking, that's just my first no. So then it's reframe. So I said, imagine if it were possible somebody from manufacturing plant could get all the way to the top at IBM. What would they need to do? And then he rattled off all these things, which basically became my career path. So he was an inadvertent mentor to me. But it was that you hear no, and I've heard no a lot. It's like, how do you turn it around?
I marvel at that tenacity and that grit that you had, Sylvia, and the fact that you can trace it all the way back to your days with the Girl Scouts is incredible. I want to dive into your decision to go to Stanford. You were 9 years old when you made that decision. I'm thinking about my own college journey and my older sister's college journey. I mean, heck, my sister applied to 14 different colleges,
Yeah.
waited until the very last night to decide that she was going to go to Duke University. For you, why Stanford and how'd you get to that decision so early?
So, now I'm 9 years old. I've had 2 years of exercising those muscles of creating opportunity and that persistence, and my teacher was really Mrs. Baldwin, my 4th grade teacher, was really ahead of her time, and she had brought her son who was going to college and out of state from, New Mexico, and she brought him into our classroom, and he talked about going to college. Well, to keep that enthusiasm going, like a week later, she had a slideshow of all these universities around the country. And remember, I'm growing up in the desert. It's incredibly brown and dry there. And when she showed this picture of Stanford University with the green verdant hills, the limestone buildings, red tile roof, I blurted out, "I want to go there." And Mrs. Baldwin walked over to my desk. She looked at me and she said, "Sylvia, you're a really smart girl and you can go there. It's one of the best universities, in the United States and the world." And so that 9-year-old girl said, "I'm going to Stanford." And then you begin figuring out what does it take? And I learned, by then I was really interested in science and math because of my Estes rocket. But I then learned, if you want to go to Stanford, you have to be good in all subjects. And you had to do this thing called extracurriculars, which I had to learn. I had to look it up. But, I was really dead set focused on that. But then an interesting thing happened. I really wanted to go undergraduate there. But I was raised in a very, all my grandparents were from Mexico. My mom was born in Mexico. My dad was born in El Paso, right on the border. So I grew up in a very Mexican type of household. And when I was in high school, I think it was junior in high school, my grandmother died when she was visiting a relative in Los Angeles. And my family didn't have money to bury her. And if you've seen the movie Coco, in the Mexican culture, that's like a big no-no.
Right.
And so my family didn't have money, but there was one person in the family that had money, and that was me. I'd been saving money. So I went with my father. I'd even have it in a CD, and I went with my father to the bank, And I remember the bank manager saying you're foregoing your interest or, by, cashing in the CD early. But I did, and I gave my father all the money so that my grandmother could be buried appropriately. And at that point, I realized I was gonna have to go to a state school, but Stanford was still my goal. And when I that was where I was gonna go to graduate school, and I told people I was gonna go to graduate school. And looking back, that's the only place I applied to. And yes, I did get in, but looking back, I thought, wow, that was really kind of, that was pretty courageous.
What was that day like when you got in?
So there were 2 things that were really impactful about that day. Well, one was I really believed I was gonna go. Um, so I got a really thin envelope, and I thought, "Well, this is either gonna be good or bad news," but it was good
Yeah.
news. But right after that, I got a phone call from a gentleman named Dr. Howard Adams, and he had started a foundation, the GEM Foundation, and it was really to encourage more underrepresented groups to get into graduate engineering. And he had never gone to New Mexico or New Mexico State. He had just focused on the really top engineering schools. Um, but years before, he had gone to Stanford and he had told the Stanford admissions officer in the engineering department that, to have his card and that at some point somebody would apply and get accepted into Stanford that fit all the GEM requirements. And Dr. Howard Adams, as he told me the story, he said the Stanford admissions officer said, "That'll never happen because we are not gonna lower our standards." And he said, "Well, here's my card, give me a call." And so, lo and behold, I got in, and that admissions officer called Dr. Howard Adams, and he said, "You know what? You were right. There's this girl from Southern New Mexico, Las Cruces." And so it was really great because, I hadn't even thought about how I was going to pay for it. I had been saving money, but, Stanford is really expensive. And, he said, "All your Stanford education is paid for," which was amazing.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, that's incredible. I want to talk about your master's degree at Stanford, but also while you were earning that master's degree at Stanford, you also started working for IBM, and you still had a lot of people that were questioning you about, do you really want to be an engineer? Are you really interested in being an engineer? And you had some really unique interview experiences along the way, and I would love to hear some of those.
Well, some of them were well, one time when I was applying for a different, financial aid, um, and it was very specific for engineering. I apparently had scored the highest marks, and so they sent 2 people to interview me, because they didn't believe that I had filled it out because it was really an engineering type of scholarship, and the questions they had asked were incredibly it was supposedly very technical and very hands-on. And at one point, I remember they really questioned whether I would like anything like that. And I said, I changed the oil on all my family's cars. And I remember the guy saying, well, okay, tell me step by step, what do you do? And so I realized, I stepped him through everything. So he realized, well, I guess you really did. But then getting a job in Silicon Valley was incredibly challenging. I was very grateful for the job at IBM, but I really had wanted to get into one of the other, type of high flying, companies that were happening at the time. There was a company called Apple Computer, there were a bunch of other ones, and I could not get an interview. I really couldn't. It was really challenging. I remember going through not just 1, but 2 boxes of that really heavy cardstock paper that you used to have to put your resumes on, but I never gave up. And when I got the chance at IBM, it was as a facilities engineer moving people's offices, and remember, I had, like, been at NASA or been a rocket scientist, but I remember thinking, "You know what, Sylvia? You got your foot in the door, this is how you create opportunity, you gotta get in the game." I was in the game and then go from there.
I wonder, Sylvia, for all the times you heard no and all the struggles and the challenges that you had as you are going into a very male dominated world, what you learned about leadership during those years and what were those lessons that you would then go on to use as you progressed up the career ladder?
Clarity of communication, having people understand very clearly what are you trying to accomplish as a team, as an organization, and really being a great communicator. I have to say that's something that I spent a lot of time working on my public speaking because I realized at first I was very engineering like in my responses, but to be a leader, you really have to be a good communicator. You have to be able to tell stories. You have to really inspire people. And, that skill, I kept working on it and getting better and better on it. And that helped me not only in the sales situation, but actually when I got into management and then when I got into leadership and certainly when I became CEO of the Girl Scouts.
Sylvia, I'm just going to name a couple of places that you've either worked or have had leadership roles at. NASA in its Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Apple, Dell. You founded Communicard, which was a nonprofit providing solutions in education and healthcare. Tell me about how you create a leadership strategy when you're going in so many different places in so many different industries, and how fluid do you have to be based on where you're working, who your employees are, and your market share?
So when I look at situations like that, like when I was pivoting from technology to education, I didn't start from ground zero. I started from an area of strength. And one of them was demographics. So I heard a presentation about the changing demographics from the state demographer. And he kind of made him sound like it was bad. And I realized he was talking about people like me. And I decided to reimagine and reinterpret that and really talk about how education was really an important part of workforce strategy. So instead of, working at like, I'm just going to do education, I said, here's a workforce strategy for the region. And then within that, what are the key indicators, getting people to understand the importance of graduating from high school, from going on and getting a certificate and going to college. And then the third one is if you speak another language, keep that fluency, but learn English as quick as you can so you can being bilingual gives you more advantages in life. So helping people understand very clearly, how do you want a better life? There's the three things: graduate from high school, get a certificate or go on to college and be bilingual and you'll have more opportunities in your life. And so I found like, within the community, yeah, they wanted to have a better workforce, right? That improves the economy. That's better. You have a higher number of college of high school graduates. That's also really good for the local economy. So finding an umbrella issue that helps people all kind of understand how they play a role in that. And that helped me quite a bit when I was in the White House because I, was the chair of the early childhood, um, the White House Education Commission for Hispanics, and, I'd been a Head Start baby, and I knew how important a child and I knew how important that was in my life, and so, I knew that being, bilingual, having dual language has been a great asset in my life. And so when I saw that at that time, federal funds could only be used for curriculum that was in English only, I found a lot of evidence, and we brought in all these researchers to show that, using a child's initial language or home language and then building off that to learn English is, child learns English quicker. So with that, I got the, home health and uh, HHS to support
Health and
that.
Human
Also,
Services, yeah.
yeah, Health and Human Services, and then also the military. They have an entire program called the Flagship Program because they know if they have more people that are speaking, English fluently and another language natively and fluently, that helps protect us from those who will do us harm. So then with the Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, Department of Education, we were able to change that. And so now federal funds could be used for early childhood. And since that time, it's really been expanded to more. And so again, though, I was really clear, how do we help? When I was talking to the military, what is it they're trying to achieve? And be very clear how this fits into that. Health and Human Services, the same thing. So really focus on what's the common ground? What do we have in common? And how do we mutually benefit?
I wonder from your time at the White House, Sylvia, and all the work that you've done around education, what you make of the state of public education in America right now.
It's really unfortunate that, we're really not really united on the importance of it because I've seen working internationally, and certainly in technology, I've seen countries be unified around their educational strategy and how they have seen that really lift their countries in a massive way. And so I really find that I think Americans are sort of taking that for granted of how important education is. And also, we've got a really declining birth rate. So we've got to make sure to be globally competitive that all the kids that are there are educated. And because not only is that giving them a leg up in life, it is improving our ability to be globally competitive. I think also we really lose sight of the fact that, you know, um, China's only, educating to speak English fluently and well, their top 10%. That's a lot of people, so, if you just think a billion people and 10% of that is 100 million. So if you think about their top 1%, that's 10 million people competing in the United States. Now you add India on top of that. India has even more people that speak English fluently. And then even if they get their top 10%, they're again well over a billion. So that's 100 million people. You go to their top 1%, that's 10 million people. And that's their top against our top. So I think a lot of people don't realize how much we have to really expand and grow the pipeline to help our students be globally competitive.
Not often do people get to go full circle, right? From that pivotal moment at the beginning in the early stages, all the way to something that is so incredible to be in this position of leadership. But you've actually done it. You joined the national. You were a national board member for the Girl Scouts of the United States. Ultimately, you have a huge responsibility of leading that organization, and then you become the interim CEO, and then you become the full-time CEO of Girl Scouts of the United States. There's an excitement, I have to imagine, for you to go from where you were as a 7-year-old all the way to that position of being a decision maker, but also a huge responsibility for you. So what is it like being a leader of an organization that was such a pivot, played such a pivotal role for you, but also now have the responsibility to move it forward?
Well, thanks for that question. I would wake up every morning wanting and being focused of how do I make this organization as relevant to the girls as it was for me? And, parents really helped me. When I first started, the number one thing parents said to me is, I don't want my daughter being Girl Scouts because she's just going to sell cookies and make macaroni necklaces. And I noticed that girls at the time all had a mobile device in their hands. And so I wanted to have girls not just be users of technology, but the creators and inventors and designers of technology. So I went and I focused on that strategy and I got partners and identified one industry in particular, cybersecurity. At that time, they had the least number of women, percentage wide for almost any of the other trades. And so I really focused on, how are they going to be globally competitive if women are not part of the solution in the United States? And they agreed. Raytheon, Palo Alto Networks both came and became big sponsors. And we were able to really raise over $30 million to create an entirely new set of badges. We created 146 new badges in my 4 years. That's the most that iconic organization has ever done. Yes, some of them were a partnership with North Face. We did civics badges. We also did entrepreneurship badges, but 126 of those were in STEM and things like robotics, encoding, data analytics, automotive, yes, space. There's like an iconic badges like my space story, but also cybersecurity. And in my last full year, it was 2019, over 1 million STEM badges were earned in urban, suburban, and rural communities. And 180,000 of those were in cybersecurity alone.
Wow.
So girls really embraced them. And I think one of the most memorable moments that was literally full circle was I was in Birmingham and I had just spoken, and there were these families that wanted to speak to me after I was done. And I went up to them and they said, we want to thank you. We're from rural Alabama. We drove hours to come here. And our daughters did all the Girl Scout cybersecurity badges. They wrote about it in their college essay and they got 4-year full ride scholarships to college. Their life has changed and our life has changed because of that. And so there's no way they would have learned that had it not been for Girl Scouts. So that was a really nice full circle moment for me.
What does that mean to you? What joy does that bring you to hear something like that?
Well, for me, I wrote a whole book about it, Path to the
Sure.
Stars, which is like, from Girl Scouts to rocket scientists. So realizing that those girls also in a rural community had that opportunity to really live a life with their potential was exactly, what I would think about every single moment when I was waking up. I really wanted girls to have those relevant skills so that they could, affect the change they want in the world to leave the world in a better place, but also to have those tools and skills so that they could live a life of their potential. So that made me really feel wonderful.
I wonder, as you reflect on your time both as a Girl Scout and then followed by your time as the CEO of the Girl Scouts with 2.5 million members, just if there were leadership skills that you wanted to pass along once you got to the top, and to make sure these are the things, these are the qualities that I want to instill in the future leaders of the world.
The what we said at Girl Scouts is building girls of courage, confidence, and character. That
There
was
you go.
incredibly important. So making sure that they had the courage, the confidence, and character. And what I really also liked and took a lot of personal fulfillment is we had a big focus on civics. And in my last 2 years, in both of those years, at least three state laws were changed by girls either in middle school or in high school by Girl Scouts. And I mean, they had changed the laws, whether it was something about, changing the law in Hawaii about the type of sunscreen you could use so that it wouldn't damage the coral reef, or plastic bags, or, how bees are supported in upstate New York. I mean, it was really touching to me because they had taken those lessons that they'd learned in Girl Scouts and it affected change. And that's leadership. I mean, there's some lobbyist groups that don't even get state laws approved, so we had girls that were doing that, so that was great.
You said in an interview, and as the father of two daughters that were Girl Scouts, you said if you want to give your daughter an edge in life, bring them to Girl Scouts. How does your role and experience shape the future of the Girl Scouts, and how do you lead through evolution?
Part of it was really making them relevant again, and that's the big focus of all those badges, and really making sure that people understood the value add of Girl Scouts, the leadership, at the time, more than 60% of the women in Congress were former Girl Scouts, and in Silicon Valley, of the women that were born in the US, a majority of them are Girl Scouts, and I'll tell you, a lot of times they'd come up to me and make sure that I knew that they had been Girl Scouts and the top cookie seller. So along that evolution is how do you make sure that you're relevant to the organization? And I think focusing on giving them the skills so that they could not just be users of technology, but the creators and the inventors and the designers was really important along the line. And also giving them those other leadership skills in areas and understanding how to apply that, whether it's in civics or whether it's in the great outdoors. That was incredibly important for me. And it's important to continue to evolve the organization around what the girls are interested in, but you've got to have a true north. And one of the ways I was able to get the organization to understand that, because at first, it's a tradition based organization, lots of volunteers, a lot of legacy alumni. And when I started talking about STEM, they're like, oh, there you go, Sylvia, you and your engineer. And what I was able to do was I was able to help them understand that the founder, Julia Gordon Low, started Girl Scouts when we were moving from the agrarian age to the industrial age. And the first badges in Girl Scouts were things like carpentry, electricians, even a pilot badge. And so, this was not getting away from our roots because now we were moving from the industrial age to the digital age. And so we needed to also give girls the types of skills to make them relevant in today's age. And so helping them understand that this was not apart from the vision of the organization. It really was harken back to the absolute roots of the founder and the leadership principles and ideas she had for Girl Scouts.
Naj and I both former journalists, and I think it would not be journalistically right of us to let this interview end, Sylvia, without asking you at least one hard hitting question.
Yeah.
And so, if you'll indulge me for a second,
Okay, let's go.
favorite Girl Scout cookie?
Uh, Yeah, there's regional differences, so you have to be careful, but you know what? I'm an authentic person, And my favorite cookie is actually aromatherapy as well as a delicious treat, which is you open up the sleeve of a thin mint, you smell that wonderful smell, and it's actually like aromatherapy for me.
Oh,
Yep.
we all did this. Oh,
All of
this is
us.
fantastic.
Thin mints
Fantastic.
across the board.
This is just now. Do you hold up? Follow up. Do you freeze the thin mints to make sure they're? Go ahead.
I freeze Thin Mints, but I like them to, also enjoy them. I enjoy them
Mhm.
as a summer treat when they're cool,
Okay.
but also having that nice, um, kinda melt in your mouth flavor as well.
Frozen Thin Mints, the best thing in the world. Also, there was a summer, and it might still be the case, but they had the Thin Mint Blizzard at Dairy Queen,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It was just what a beautiful, beautiful treat that I would indulge in way too often.
See, Sylvia, that was the hard-hitting
Oh, okay.
60-minute style journalism question that we
Okay, well,
had
thank you
for you.
very much. Yeah.
Sylvia Acevedo, an incredible leadership journey for you, from learning from the Girl Scouts all the way to leading the Girl Scouts and so much more. Also, an author with a new book coming out this summer, Trailblazers Playbook. Definitely want to catch that. Sylvia Acevedo, it's been an honor to have you on the Leadership Classroom. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you both. Thank you.